Hey guys, this is Don with Osiris Studios again. Got a tutorial for you today on building some modular assets from texture sheets. These are pretty good just to get a lot of quick assets into a level without a whole lot of time. So you can see here, just made 3 basic ones for this tutorial. I got a door, a window, and just a straight wall. Normally you're going to want to make, anywhere from 8 to 10 different pieces. The more pieces, the more you can do with it without as much repetition in your map. But for this tutorial, I just made 3 for you real quick so that you can get an idea of how it works. And then this is what it's, just with those 3 pieces, you get a lot of variation as far as how you can make the shapes and sizes of the different levels here. Can even make some stairs and add a 2-story, have interconnecting rooms just from 3 pieces here. So alright, so to get started, what you're going to do is get all of your textures that you're going to use in your texture sheet together first. I've skipped that part and gone straight to showing you the actual texture here and how we do it. So first thing you want to do is make sure that you have a good grid size. The texture sheet I'm doing is 2048 by 2048. So what you want to do, Control H is how I'm turning on and off the helpers there, turning on and off the grid. So if you go into Edit, Preferences, Grids, Guides, and Slices, you can change your grid here. Now, since I like to use a grid snap of 16 in UDK, what I did here is make my texture sheet match that. So what I'm doing is just figuring 2048 by the grid snap of 16 gives me 128. So that way I've got 16 units on X and Y here. Then all you do is you move your textures in and make sure that they follow those grid lines. Then you're good to go. For this one I made 3 different ones. I didn't really use the brick texture too much, but I did use a lot of the wood and metal ones there. So these are the 3 textures I've got. See the empty spaces I just filled in with a neutral color. First thing, like I always do, is create my player model for a reference size. Bring in my 3 textures. Then I'm going to create some planes. I'm going to use 256. The way I just came up with that number is playing around and seeing what looked best next to my player model there. Now you want to take your segments and change that up to 16. You're going to convert that over to an editable poly or editable mesh. I just like to use poly. Get your face selection tool and then just detach the various pieces. Alright, I went in just to rename it there in Tools, Rename Objects, just to organize the scene a little bit better. Next thing I'm going to do is go and affect the pivot, center them all, just so they're easy to move around. So you can see here alone, if you just need a very low poly asset, you've already got it right there. But for most next-gen games, you're going to want a little bit more detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all these extra vertices that I don't need. Just by selecting them and then hitting Control Backspace. Then I'm going to use the Connect tool to add a little bit more detail in there. Selecting every other vertice. And just pulling them up a little bit. Just to give it a little bit of depth in its texture. Now keep in mind, there's going to be a lot going on this, so I don't need a whole ton of detail out of these, so just getting a little bit of geometry so the light makes good shadows is all we really need. Going to do the same thing on the rest of these here. I'll give you a couple variations. So on this one, I'm going to extrude the face on it so I can give this one a little bit more depth. Gonna cap the other end. I'm going to start off the same here, selecting the vertices, Control L to loop it, and then move them all together. Now I'm not even going to worry about the ends there, UV mapping those, just because, you know, quite honestly, for an asset like this and the size of it, it's not going to be worth it to me. Now I'm just going to add some more vertices across the top here, so that way I can get a little bit more detail in the actual shape of it. Alright, so real easy there, just getting it all, I'm going to finish up the rest of them real quick. This one I decided I'd rather have two separate ones than another big square. So, which is the nice thing about, you know, working like this is you can change things on the fly. Also, keep in mind, if you're ever doing this kind of corrugated metal, you don't have to match up the texture all the time. A lot of times people will try and put as much detail as possible into these, but when you're in a production environment, you have to be able to develop quickly, or, you know, it's costing you money the other way. So the faster you can pump out these assets, the better. Now, some pieces, don't get me wrong, you're going to need to spend a lot more time on still, but something like this is a cosmetic, very small part of the overall model, and an even smaller part of the overall map. So here I'm just removing a couple of faces, and I'm going to bridge the empty gaps. UV map looks okay on that, so I'm not going to worry about redoing that. I'm going to add a couple of different modifiers here just to get a little bit more use out of this. Give it a little bit more depth in the world. Just adding a bend modifier on it. I'm also going to add a twist modifier. The more vertices you add on this, the more detail you'll get out of those bends and twists. But that's perfect for what we're going to use it for. I'm just going to scale this one up a little bit. Since this isn't the actual modular piece I'm going to add, it's not that important that I'm scaling it right now. You know, play around with the different bends, twists, waves, anything like that you want to. You don't have to use them on all of them. Like this one, I just put a little bit in there. Alright, so just an overview of, you know, real quickly, probably about 17 minutes it looks like. And you have a good set there. Just put a light in there to get an idea of how the shadows are going to look. See if I need to add any more depth to it or not. Alright, going to group them all together now just for easy navigation around my scene. Gonna do the same thing with the wood. Showing you a different technique for one of the modifiers I use here, just for a really quick detail. It's ripple. See, I added a lot of vertices to it, but this will give a really good look for warped wood. So when you have wood that's going to be outside getting rained on, it's going to end up looking like this anyway. Just going back and grabbing all the faces, throwing an edit poly on top of it, and then auto smoothing it so it doesn't look as edged on the front. Now on this one, I am going to go ahead and re-UV these sides, just so they probably will get seen. So real easy there. Here's all the different wood assets we got out of that. So you can add a little bit more detail to them if you need to, changing the shape, extruding some of the faces. See the basic geometry I have there. Now, if you want to take it one step further, you can add some more edge loops to these, take them into Mudbox or ZBrush or whatever high poly tool you use, and add more details to them, then bake them down. It really depends on the project you want, on how much detail you want. Alright, so now I'm going to import my reference geometry. This is going to be the size of the actual modular asset I'm going to use. And what I'm going to do there is just take that real basic shape, layer these other modular assets on top of it, and then later attach everything to it, so that way I still have my modular pieces there at the grid snap that I need. Just going to UV the face of this blank wall first. Going to throw a base texture down on top of it. The nice thing about doing this is you can change this texture to basically whatever you want and get even more use out of your modular assets. Alright, it's got it all UV'd up. Ready to throw a texture on it there. And just for the time being, I'm going to test it out on one of my wood textures that I'm already using. If you can make it work with one of your texture sheets, you even save more texture memory in the long run. So if you can make that work, more power to you. If not, you can use a lower resolution. You don't need to use a full 2048 on something like this. Once again, it all depends on your project. So very similar to the Daisy tutorial, what you're doing now is just pulling your various modular assets down onto your mesh here and just lining them up and decorating them. Now when you move them over, make sure that you do an instance versus a copy. That way if you need to change any of your modular assets, you can, and they'll all change instead of having to go back and do them one by one. Now pieces like this, in the interest of time, I didn't remove the back faces, but typically if you're going to use something like that, it'd be best to remove the back faces. That way you don't get any Z fighting and just you're saving geometry. Although as you can see, this whole scene right now is only 1400 polys, so not that expensive, but keep in mind I'll probably end up using, if this was a modular set we were going to use, it would probably end up being repeated 20 times or so. So they add up. So you can see, you just keep adding to it until you get something you like. You don't have to use all of them in one, but it's good just to get enough pieces here to give you a lot of good variation. Now if you needed to go super low poly, like if you're making a mobile game, you could even take this one step further, throw a cage on these and bake all that bake all that information down onto one flat surface and even one texture. Alright, so real quickly there you saw that we got some good variation. Used a handful of our assets on it. Now depending on how much you're going to be using one object, you can make a corner piece so that they break up the texture seams and repeat really well. So like by putting this on the end, I could use this wall over and over and it wouldn't look like a repeating texture necessarily. So there's your first piece. What you want to do is grab your main piece that has the pivot snap down on the bottom right, attach all your pieces to it, then you got one new one. If you're going into UDK, you're going to want to go ahead and make a light map for your object at this point. You can see there real easily, they snap together, they work really well. Obviously you'd want more variation than that, but so you can stack them up and down, side to side, whatever you want to do. Now, like I say, you can see some of the Z fighting there. If you were going to use this in a game, you are going to want to go ahead and go in there to clean it up. All depends on how much time you got, game budget, things like that. So here I am making just a really quick light map. Normally you're going to want to go in and get a little bit more detailed than this, but for the points of this tutorial, it'll be good. Alright, so now we got all three modular assets into the engine. Got the three variations, the straight wall, the corner, and the door. So now it's really just about getting them set up like you like. Now since we kept the main piece to the size we wanted, everything's going to snap to the grid nice. So the nice thing in UDK is you can mirror accesses or axes real easily just by right clicking, going to transform. So that gives you even more variation with less tools. Got to transform, mirror x-axis, y-axis, z-axis, whatever you want to do. Now every now and again on the when you rotate or mirror, you're going to throw it off the grid a little bit depending on where you put your pivot point. So just changing it up a little bit so you can get it back to the right place is easy. See, everything lines up nice. Now the nice thing on these modular pieces is you're really not going to have to worry about the tops. You want to add in, floors, ceilings, any other pieces that you're going to want to complete your set. Typically for a modular set, it's going to be a fairly simple building, or you can outline it with PSP and then come in and put these modular assets on top of it to give it detail. But you can see there in a matter of minutes, we've imported our assets, got our textures up, and built a very simple room. If you had a roof, you would basically be doing the same thing here. Now, technically, if you wanted to, you can just stretch this one out to be a roof, but not recommended. You should just make your own modular piece for the roof. But if you're in a pinch or it's something where it's not a high detail area, you can get away with something like this. Just throw a light in here to see what it looks like. So you can see there with minimal effort, you get a pretty decent result. And unfortunately in the game mode I've got it set in, it's not going to let me start from there, but you get the idea. So these are the pieces that we have again, different variations you can get. Thanks for watching guys, and be sure to like us.